Hello, my name is JJ Hawley, and I serve as President and CEO of the Woodlands Area Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to another episode of Between the Trees. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Woodlands Online, for their support of the program each week. And it is my pleasure to welcome Jace Houston, General Manager of the San Jacinto River Authority.
Glad to be here.
Well, congratulations. Welcome back.
You bet.
There's always, water is always an issue.
Oh my goodness, it is.
Has been since the dawn of time, and I guess it will be for forever.
It's a major influencer of civilizations. There's
That's
either
true.
too much, there's not enough, and we're doing the best we can to manage it.
Yeah, how do we get to a good average, you know?
Right.
So the management of water is kind of complicated. You know, like you said, you've got to, there's flood control, then there's also just, drinking water, usable water.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the San Jacinto River Authority, and what are all the pieces and parts?
The best way for me to approach that is just to start sort of at a statewide policy level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every state in the country does water a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's just talk about Texas. Texas manages surface water and groundwater a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
Surface water meaning water that flows across the state in rivers and lakes and streams or whatever. That's owned by the state of Texas. You have to get permission to use that water. It's regulated by TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Groundwater is owned essentially by the landowner. If you have a piece of property, you have the right to drill a well on your property and you can pump water. Now, it's subject to regulation by groundwater districts. So the state chose to use locally either elected or appointed governmental entities called groundwater districts to manage the aquifer if you need to. A lot of counties in Texas don't have groundwater districts, but if you have an issue with your groundwater, that's how you do it. So it's either local management or state management. We do it a little differently in Texas, but hey, we do everything better here, I think. So where do river authorities fit into this? So many, many years ago, over 100 years ago, the state realized that some water projects need to be on a larger scale to serve a large area. It's not just to serve one city. We may need to build a reservoir to serve an entire county, every community in the county, or multiple counties. Mm-hmm. Or we may need to build a flood detention reservoir to manage and mitigate flooding that's going to benefit 3 or 4 counties downstream. Mm-hmm. There wasn't really an entity that the legislature had created or that existed to do those sorts of large-scale regional projects. That's really why river authorities were created. We look 50 to 100 years into the future. How much water are we going to need? If our region that we serve needs more, river authorities have the ability to facilitate these kinds of large-scale projects for the customers in the basin. If we need to build a flood detention reservoir to help mitigate flooding or manage the flow in the rivers, river authorities can implement those sorts of projects. That's really how we fit into the puzzle.
And then we have, you mentioned the groundwater district. Our local groundwater district is Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District. So
LSGCD.
There you go. I always get the acronym wrong. And their responsibility is how do we manage that groundwater, that aquifer? So how much can get pumped out, and what is the effect of too much pumping out if you do that?
So, and this is another important factor. People need to know it's different in every part of Texas. The aquifers are different, the geology is different, but in the Houston region, the greater Houston region, it's not just unique to Montgomery County. The way our aquifers are laid down geologically, if we pump too much water too fast from our aquifers, we see a drop in the water levels in our water wells. The pressure in the aquifer begins to go down. You have to lower your pumps and motor, increase your horsepower, and keep chasing these falling water levels. That's one problem.
Yeah, because you've got that straw going down into the ground,
right?
And if it's not getting to the water, you've got to
keep dropping it.
Yeah.
Think of it as drinking a thick milkshake. If you suck too hard on the straw in a thick milkshake, you'll pull an empty spot. It's the same way with these aquifers. Yeah. It's like a thick milkshake. It's not like drinking an iced tea. You can suck as hard as you want and it'll go.
And used to, you drill a hole down, the pressure from the water would just
come right up the well.
Yep.
Shoot right out the top of your straw, but it doesn't do that anymore.
Yep.
The other problem that occurs in our region, if you pump too hard too fast, is the clay layers down below where you're pumping from will begin to compress. and the land surface will actually subside. We have parts of the Harris County area that have sunk over 10 feet due to groundwater withdrawal.
In fact, there is an organization called the Harris Galveston County Subsidence District.
Correct.
To try to help, and by the way, we have all these political subdivisions that are organized by, lines on the map, but an aquifer doesn't recognize lines on the map.
That's correct.
And we know we have subsidence in Harris and Galveston County, like you were saying.
Sure, and actually we know we have subsidence in Harris and all surrounding counties, Montgomery, Waller, Fort Bend, Brazoria, all the way around, Galveston. This is not new. It's been happening since the 50s and 60s. Harris Galveston County began managing their pumpage to prevent subsidence starting in the mid-70s. Fort Bend County started managing its pumpage, and by manage I mean reduce how much you pump.
Yeah.
They began doing that in the 80s. Montgomery County created a groundwater district, Lone Star, in 2001, and they've been managing the aquifer in Montgomery County, trying to figure out how much can we pump? Are we pumping more than is so that it's creating subsidence and water level declines, and just following through with the management of the aquifer. So we want it to be sustainable. We want to use as much groundwater as we can because it's the cheapest water supply we have.
Yeah, and another organization, before we go into deeper into how water is done and groundwater, surface water, is there's an organization called the Woodlands Water Agency. How did they mix into this puzzle?
Sure, and if I can, I'll go ahead and explain how SJRA fits into that.
Yes.
So the Woodlands was developed with just a brilliant master plan in mind. It really was.
We're all benefiting from it.
And we are, absolutely. When the Woodlands was developed, the utilities and drainage were always intended to be put in and managed by MUD districts, municipal utility districts, more than one. There would eventually be 8 to 12 of them, and it ended up there's about 10 or 11. Some have consolidated now for efficiency, but it's around 10. And so the developer didn't want to end up with 10 individual water and wastewater systems. So you don't want an overall Woodlands community with 10 wastewater plants and 10 water plants and just 10 of everything. That would be very inefficient. And so the vision was always that the Woodlands would be a regional system. The Woodlands Water Agency serves as sort of the master MUD that coordinates all the utility efforts of those 10 MUDs. So they send out the water bills to the customers, and they read the meters, and they check on repairs and things of that nature.
And
that's
as things usually are in the Woodlands, it's a unique model.
It is. And a very successful model that ultimately saves the homeowners a lot of money.
Saves us money, exactly.
Right. Now, where does SJRA fit into that? Well, when they were developing this idea, they knew they still needed a regional, overarching, connected wholesale system, like not 10 wastewater plants, maybe just 1 or 2 or 3. Well, they needed an agency that could step in and own and operate these regional systems. And they asked SJRA back in the 70s if the River Authority would agree to come in and be the owner, builder, operator of these regional parts of the system, the wastewater plants, the water wells, the large diameter lines. And so you've got water lines that crisscross around the Woodlands that are 12, 18, 24 inches in diameter. The San Jacinto River Authority operates those on behalf of the MUDs. We just have a contract with the MUDs. Whatever the cost is to manage their system for them, that's what they pay in a rate. There's no markup, there's no profit. It's just we provide that service for them.
And it makes us more efficient and in turn saves us money.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, so that's SGRA, Lone Star Groundwater, and Woodlands Water, and the MUDs. So 4 different entities that, just to start with, that kind of control our water. Can you tell us a little bit about speaking of lines, the groundwater reduction plan and the history of that and how that came about and why we did that and what that is?
So as I mentioned, the entire region, the greater Houston region, has been dealing with the effects of overpumpage for decades. And so everyone realized eventually, hey, we can't just keep sucking on the straw of the milkshake that hard. It won't produce enough water to keep up. We need to supplement with other sources. So the Houston region's been on surface water since the late 70s, early 80s.
And that's Lake Houston,
the Brazos River, the Trinity River, Lake Conroe. All these different surface water sources are now being utilized to balance. We have conjunctive use. We're using some groundwater and some surface water, and that's how we're meeting all of our water demands. And we're reusing treated wastewater in a lot of places. Mostly irrigation, but it's being reused. So in Montgomery County, when the Lone Star Groundwater District was created in 2001, they began to study the aquifer, try to figure out how much can we pump without having subsidence, without having the continued water level declines that we've been dealing with. They set a goal, they set a date, and they said, okay, all of you utilities in the county, you need to have a plan to reduce your pumpage by 2016 and start using some alternative. It doesn't have to be surface water, but you got to come up with something to reduce your groundwater pumpage. The River Authority offered a plan that we made available to the entire county. Any utility could join. We ended up having 80 utilities join together in this plan. We built one water treatment plant at Lake Conroe. We treat drinking water from the lake and we deliver it to some of those 80. We don't deliver it to all 80. That would be inefficient. It's too much pipeline.
It costs a lot of money to put pipe in the ground.
Pipe in the ground is one of the most expensive parts of this program. And so we have lines that run to Conroe. We have lines that run down to the Woodlands and Oak Ridge and southern Montgomery County mud and some of the muds along Rayford Road area. And they are taking some surface water and some groundwater.
And those were the largest groundwater users as well.
They were Conroe and the Woodlands are the two largest groundwater users for sure. And then some of those others are large also. And the goal was to take enough pressure off the aquifer that we stop seeing the water level declines, we stop seeing the subsidence, and everyone else in the county can continue to produce groundwater. You want to use groundwater. That's the benefit to everyone.
Again, because it's cheaper.
It's cheaper, and so we stabilize the water levels. We make that a reliable source for everybody that's not taking the surface water. They can continue to use their wells, but that drove the cost down dramatically. If every individual utility in the county had been forced to reduce their pumpage, each and every one of them, the cost would have been astronomical.
And that's how much of the GRP
The
cost?
GRP program, this plant and the lines to do what we did was $500 million. $500 million.
So again, it's not cheap.
Right.
And we sometimes forget, we just go to the tap and turn it on and we get water. But there's a lot that goes into it. Now, one thing I understand is, how is the aquifer recharged? I mean, that water that's pulled out, how long has it been down there and how does it get recharged?
A long time. This aquifer is what's called a confined aquifer. So the rain that falls in Montgomery County, the small amount of it that actually trickles into the ground is caught in the upper layers of the aquifer. The layer that we pull from for most of our drinking water purposes is anywhere from, here in the Woodlands, it's probably anywhere from 700 to 1,800 feet below the surface. That's rain that had to fall in Walker County, north of us, or up around Lake Conroe. So it had to fall up there, recharge into the aquifer, travel through this tight milkshake sands of an aquifer to get to the Woodlands. And
how long does that take? If you get a rain 100 miles north of us, it's
hundreds or possibly even thousands of years.
And it's hard to tell. But just because we get a good thunderstorm in the Woodlands doesn't mean that the aquifer is recharged today.
It does mean the watering slows down. The biggest impact you see from rainfall is people stop watering, and we can see in our water wells an immediate rebound because we're not having to pump as hard.
And that's also a good point, is we use most of our water on irrigation.
That's right. At least 50% of the average homeowner's water use is outdoor. It's certainly less in the winter, but in the summer it's 60+% of your demand. If people would learn to water more efficiently, utilize landscaping and turf grasses that you take less water, not only would they save money, it would delay the necessity for us to go and get more supply to keep up with this growing demand.
So St. Augustine takes a lot of water.
It does.
And everybody's got that in the yard, and we all want it to be green. You had mentioned also about wastewater treatment plants. So our wastewater treatment plants are aging. You're getting 40+ years on those. Can you tell us what the current situation is? Like, how many do we have, and what's the plan going forward with those?
Right now, the Woodlands has 3 wastewater plants. 2 are medium-sized plants, and then there's one very small one that kind of serves the Harper's Landing area. But believe it or not, and I know it's hard for people to believe because the Woodlands is still a gorgeous community and doesn't look old at all to me. But there's one of those plants over 45 years old. And typically this kind of infrastructure has a 30 to 50 year lifespan. And now you're having to replace major parts. And so we have been sitting down with the mud districts, the directors, with the township, with other stakeholders, and doing a very comprehensive strategic plan on what is the most cost-effective solution to this. Do you simply rehab that plant in place? Because you can take one basin out of service at a time, and you can repair and replace, and eventually you've rebuilt the whole thing. That's one option. Or you have to keep in mind you've got a second plant that's over 25 years old, or 20 to 25 years old. That one's coming along too. Do you want two plants? Would you be better off having a single new plant so that way when this one ages out, you don't have to replace it. You just divert that flow to this new shiny plant that you've built. That's what we're studying. It's a lot of options being analyzed, and we're still in this sort of cost feasibility analysis. It's coming together. We've honed it down to a couple of options and some sizing discussions that are taking place.
And I can tell you, having had the pleasure of being in some of those 4+ hour long meetings.
Bless you.
Yes, somebody's got to do it, and the people in that room are amazing, especially the mud directors that are generally. This is a non-paid elected position to serve on a mud board. And these are largely retired individuals that have been, consultants, engineers. They bring a wealth of expertise and knowledge. I mean, they are talking about, flow rates and, all this stuff. And it's amazing that we have that volunteer resource in the Woodlands. We're very fortunate that really care about this and go and spend time. And they get a lunch, but that's the only compensation that they get.
The great thing to me in participating in some of those meetings was everybody's been very constructive. It's not always that you can put elected officials from 10 or 11 different muds together in a room and they want to come to consensus. They actually are trying to work through some very complicated engineering, technical, and financial issues. There are some policy calls in that too. You can take on more debt now and build something that's bigger and maybe a one and done type solution, but that front loads a lot of the cost. Or you could build something smaller now and then something smaller a little bit later and something smaller a little later. Now, in the long run, that may cost more, but in the short run, it keeps rates. That's a policy decision.
True.
They are working great together.
And they are extremely diligent, and they are trying to figure out the most cost-efficient way to do it. But at the end of the day, just like our water source, groundwater, surface water, how we treat wastewater, all of that's not cheap.
It's not. These are major investments. Now, I don't want to scare people. To be honest, the Woodlands has very, very competitive rates. If you do a rate survey for the greater Houston region, especially where it's kind of apples to apples, we have excellent rates in the Woodlands. And even though we're having to convert to surface water, which does add a significant cost to the overall program, we still, if you look at other parts of Texas that use surface water or use groundwater and surface water, we still have some of the lowest rates for comparable utilities. And that's planning, that's self-discipline, that's not kicking the can down the road. When something needs to be maintained, fix it. Because if you wait and put it off on some future elected board, it's just going to be more costly.
And that's a good point too. We often take this resource for granted, but there are cities in the U.S. that have had water issues, and you want to talk about a hit to your economic development. Attracting businesses here, attracting people to live here. If you don't have water, nothing else really is going to matter. I mean, roads and schools won't matter because no one will live here.
Right. And reliability is something else I love to brag on, and not to brag really on the River Authority. We're just carrying it out. The mud directors have chosen over the last several decades that they want to have a system that's reliable. Whether there's a hurricane, a major storm, an ice storm, no matter the circumstances, their preference was, we really want to have a system that runs, no matter what the conditions are. So we have backup generators. Those are investments. They had to choose to make investments in which means the bill's going to be a little higher. But when an ice storm comes through, the Woodlands, Texas has got water and wastewater services that were uninterrupted. The GRP plant, the surface water plant, where we treat surface water to bring down here, not only did it run through the ice storm and the hurricane, we were filling tanker trucks and sending water to other parts of the region, other parts of the state, because our customers have decided it's worth making an investment to have reliability.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have the management of the resources we do, because it is cost efficient and it's reliable.
Yeah. They have made the political hard decisions to do that. So kudos to them.
Before we close up, anything else you want to add about wastewater or groundwater or surface water? You know, and it's always complicated. We could talk for hours about it. But
we really could, and would love to do that sometime. I would say to people,
it's not just a hobby; it's your job.
That's right. You know, I would say to people, one of the biggest challenges that utilities face across the country is getting information out. Like this opportunity. I wish every resident of the Woodlands could hear these sorts of conversations and learn these things, because it helps them understand where the water comes from, where the wastewater goes, how it all functions, who's behind the scenes, and ultimately why it costs what it does. Now, like as I mentioned, we have great rates, honestly. There are places that maybe have cheaper rates. They're in a circumstance where they have cheap groundwater and they don't have to use surface water or whatever.
They haven't had to do the capital investment that we have.
So someone might move from a part of the state that was like that and think, wow, these rates are really high. But people here, they understand you get what you pay for. And we have great rates, but the information gap is the challenge. I just want people to always, if you look at your bill and something doesn't seem right, pick up the phone and call. We've got people that will answer their questions. There's information that will explain.
How would they find out how to get a hold of you to say, hey, Jace, you've talked a lot about water, but I still have some questions. How would they reach you guys?
Number one, look at your bill and call the number on the bill, because if the Woodlands Water Agency can't answer the question, which they can, but if they wanted to, then they can get them to us. You can go to sjra.net. We try to put frequently asked questions and other information on our website.
And SJRA has a board, and you have open board meetings as well.
We have open board meetings and always come to those. We actually have customer meetings. So all the 80 customers that participate in our surface water program, we hold a monthly meeting with their representatives. They can attend those. They can attend the Woodlands Water Agency meetings. I mean, in all of these governing organizations are very open, and they want to share information, because the biggest thing that creates challenges is when people don't know what's going on.
That's right. And I would not want to close this up before we talked about flooding as well. And there's a lot of major investment. Again, takes money.
It does.
But there's a lot of major investment that's been done locally by the MUDs, just in cleaning out ditches, for instance. But there's also projects that are really expensive but really important, because we've got to get that water that, we get a big flood here, we've got to get to the Gulf as soon as we can.
Right.
You always talk about unplugging the bottom of the bathtub.
That's right.
So I know the city of Houston, Harris County have some projects going on to help that, because it all funnels to Lake Houston.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it's so timely. In the legislature right now, this week, there's a group of budget conferees, so 5 House members and 5 Senate members, that are meeting to iron out the differences between the House budget and the Senate budget in Austin. And one of the major projects that's on the bubble is funding for an expansion of Lake Houston spillways. And you're absolutely right. When you're going to improve drainage, you really need to start at the lowest point, because if we improve drainage up at the top end, we're just getting water downstream faster, and it's going to slow down somewhere else.
And that's how places like Kingwood get flooded.
So if we could improve the flow at the spillway at Lake Houston and allow more flow to be able to pass through that reservoir during a major storm without having so much rise, that prevents flooding. That's an important project. When we met with a group of stakeholders from upstream and downstream of Lake Conroe to talk about flood mitigation projects, one of the things they agreed on early was that's a good project. That Lake Houston project, improving their spillway, helps everyone. Upstream and downstream, there was consensus on that. There are stakeholders from Lake Conroe right now call in the legislature and not to pester them, but just to keep them informed that, hey, this is a good project.
And encourage them to
encourage them
that.
to support the funding for that.
And that's another element is we have to understand the topography a little bit and what flows where. But San Jacinto River, obviously, you know, the River Authority is working with the San Jacinto River, which flows Lake Conroe and down through and into Lake Houston. But there are other tributaries that flow into Lake Houston as well.
There really are. I mean, everything from the northern portion, north of 1960, let's just say roughly, everything north of 1960 in Harris County flows to Lake Houston. Everything in Montgomery County flows to Lake Houston. Everything east of Montgomery County, so I believe that's San Jacinto County or Liberty County, all of that flows to Lake Houston. It's a really large watershed. It's almost, I want to say it's 2,500 square miles, I believe.
Yeah, because San Jacinto River, Trinity River.
Well, the Trinity's separate, but the San Jacinto River has an East Fork and a West Fork.
Yeah.
We're on the West Fork, but the East Fork, it's a large watershed. The actual watershed that flows into Lake Conroe is only 450 square miles. So we're a portion of that, but it is a large watershed. And so that's why that choke point at the Lake Houston Dam is so critical.
And you've got to balance, as you manage lake levels at Lake Conroe, you've got to, you know, people have said, well, why don't you just lower the lake levels when you see a hurricane's come in? And how hard can it be to predict that?
Well, right. Predicting the weather, that's real crystal ball stuff. Although I will say they are getting better and better. And the problem is the closer in time you are, 24 hours weather predictions are really good. 48 hours are actually really good. 3 to 5 days, they're starting to get iffy. And it takes at least 5 days to be able to move enough water out of Lake Conroe to make any sort of difference. And that's just hard to do. The predictions are difficult.
And I would imagine if, let's say that you lower Lake Conroe, that's great, but the rain has to come in north of Lake Conroe or on Lake Conroe to benefit. And if you do that prematurely, you've just sent more water downstream that flows into Lake Houston, which sort of fills up that section of the bathtub.
Right.
And if they get all that rain, you've already added to the problem.
So we always have to, if the city of Houston were to call for any pre-release from Lake Conroe, they will typically stop 48 hours before the rainfall to let the river drain out. Because they have to have time to get it down to Lake Houston and out. It takes 24 hours for water from Lake Conroe to get to Lake Houston. So you're already building in some time there. And then you're right. If you're trying to mitigate a storm by lowering Lake Conroe, the storm has to fall above Lake Conroe. Well, if we drop 6 inches or a foot out of Lake Conroe, and then the rain happens somewhere else in the watershed and misses the lake, which has happened in many storms, now you're just a foot low, and if you go into a drought, you've hamstrung yourself.
Exactly.
So it's very difficult.
And you've added to the water south of us. Just the total. So
it's a difficult challenge to manage, and I think we've worked with the stakeholders from upstream and downstream, Conroe area and Kingwood area stakeholders, to come up with a compromise that right now everybody seems very supportive of, and it's worked well. And the gate project at Lake Houston is a part of that.
Again, lots of issues around just water. Seems so simple, but water rights, management of water, how we manage droughts, floods, it can get really complicated.
It does.
Well, thank you for all the work that you do to help manage a resource that, you know, sometimes we just kind of take for granted. We just turn the tap on or the water hose and there it is.
You're welcome. Happy to do it.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Between the Trees. Again, my name is JJ Holly, and I serve as President and CEO of the Woodlands Area Chamber of Commerce. And thanks to Woodlands Online for their support of the program each week. Thank you and have a great rest of the day.